Session. For the record, council members Lee, Fimbres, and Oleg will be attending this meeting electronically through Microsoft Teams. Vice Mayor Dahl is absent, excused. So with that, items 1 is an executive session. Ms. Clerk.
Item 1 is an executive session, update on legal litigation matters concerning PFAS, contamination, potential claims against the United States and the United States Environmental Protection Agency's EPA Emergency Administrative Order for response action issued to the United States Air Force and Arizona Air National Guard, docket numbered PWS AO 2024-10, and is being held pursuant to ARS Section 38-43103A3 and A4.
May I have a motion to go into executive, please?
So moved, Your
Move,
Honor.
Madam Mayor. Second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion carries. And we will see you out here in about 45 minutes. Thank you.
Okay.
Back from executive session. All good? Tim? Mike? Okay. Richard and Nikki, excellent. So may I have a motion to return to study session, please?
So moved, Madam Mayor.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion carries. What is the council's pleasure on item 2?
Honorable Mayor, I would ask for a motion that the mayor and council authorize and direct the city manager and the city attorney, together with city staff, to proceed as discussed in executive session and to continue to advocate and advance the city's interests for a long-term solution relating to PFAS and to providing safe water for all of Tucson Water's customers.
So that is a motion. May I have, did we have a motion? That's the suggested motion. May I have a motion?
I think I heard Richard.
Second.
Alrighty, so there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Motion carries. Item 3, time has been set aside for a discussion on the independent economic impact analysis for the proposed mixed-use development at 2 East Congress. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council. Here today is our Economic Initiatives Director, Barbara Coffey, who can give some quick background on this item.
Great. Thanks very much. Honorable Mayor, members of council,
This item before you today is the review of the economic impact analysis related to the GPLET application for 2 East Congress. As a reminder, the developer proposes to adapt what was the former Chase Bank downtown into an event center and supper club. The project meets the requirements of our GPLET program. The analysis does confirm there will be a 100% increase in property value as a result of the completed redevelopment project. Direct revenues to the city of just over $3.4 million exceed the value of the developer incentive. The overall estimated economic impact of the project is $23 million, and the 8-year property tax abatement is valued at approximately $1.6 million. In addition, the developer has also drafted a community benefits agreement with the Downtown Residents Association that includes a provision for meeting space several times a year and support for website development and other neighborhood safety and cleanup support. Next steps would be to direct staff to prepare a lease agreement to formalize the 8-year GPLET financial incentive, and I do believe Robert Kaler is here tonight if there are any additional questions.
Any questions or comments on this item? Hearing none. Oh, there's Councilmember Ulick.
Thank you, Mayor. Actually, I'd like to move forward with the recommendation to proceed with the GPLET.
There is a motion. May I have a second for this motion?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any against? Motion carries. Well, I for one am really pleased to see this beautiful historic building being reactivated. Happy to see a benefits agreement with downtown residents, and of course, the possibility of adding more living spaces is really exciting, because the more living spaces we add, the better it is for everyone. So I'm looking forward to, Mr. Kaler, I see you out there. Thank you so much. I'm so happy about this project in Tucson. So congratulations. Really appreciate your investment in a gorgeous property and in downtown. Thank you. Hearing none other discussion points, we move on to item 4. Mayor and council are to receive an update on the American Rescue Plan Act funding and consider the staff recommendation for spending. This is an item that Mr. City Manager, you can open up.
Thank you again, Mayor. With me is our Assistant City Manager and Chief Financial Officer, Anna Rosenberry. She'll give you some brief background on this item. And as you noted in your opening statement, there is some reallocation of dollars within the already established Mayor and Council framework that we're asking for your blessing to move forward with today. But with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Rosenberry.
Thank you, Mayor and Council members. We are returning to you this afternoon with an update to a report that we had initially issued in May, covering our 3 basic areas of the city's ARPA and framework dollars: the community partner projects, the Mayor and Council office allocations, and the city managed projects. And really the biggest news comes in 2 of these areas. We are excited, first of all, to kick off our round 3 of our community partner grants. To date, $18 million of these funds have been invested in the community through these partnership grants, and we will be opening what is expected to be our 3rd and final round of application process for these community grants, and we have $10 million available to award. The application opportunities are going to be communicated in multiple ways. We have a posted timeline, process, contact details, and links available on a website now. That web address was included in our report to you. That site is actually live, although the portal is not open yet. The portal will open for applications on Monday, September 16th, and it will close on Monday, September 30th. But that website contains all the deadlines and informations. It is the place where community partners will land to submit their grants through the same Zoom grants platform that we've used in the past. We have also added to that site a full listing of the round 1 and round 2 successful grant recipients for those programs. So if people are curious what the city has awarded this money for in the past, they can find the complete listings of the $18 million that's been awarded. We also intend to issue round 3 funding notifications via email to all of our prior grant funding applicants. And we will do that through the grant portal. So when people have applied in the past, those organizations have given us contact information, and we'll be using that system to give round 3 notifications. We'll also be doing some direct communication via email from our staff to all of our prior award recipients. And then we'll be, of course, using community newsletters, press releases to get the word out that we're accepting applications. I know all of your offices do a great job in communicating via newsletter. We would love to get information if you'd like to help us distribute the news on this opportunity. With round 3 expected to be the final round of awards, we just want to be clear that we have established a full estimated budget for these partner grants in a number of areas that we've been awarding amounts in those areas as we've been going through round 1 and round 2. And there became this question about, okay, for round 3, are we going to be looking for grants to stick with the category totals and award to total category amounts, or will there be some flexibility to possibly, based on the quality of applications, move funding availability from one area to the next? And it's really expected that the evaluation board would be making those decisions, as well as possibly reserving some funding and recommending to the city manager that the city deliver projects through the program.
And Madam Mayor, members of the council, what I'd like to add to that is we want to leave that flexibility because through the community granting process, we're leaving some needs unmet, and we're responding to community demand for people willing to provide those services. So at the end of the day, there may be some funding within the intention to go to community delivered that we might reserve and either pivot to a city delivered solution in that area if it's unmet, or other mechanisms by perhaps engaging directly with the mayor and council about distribution of those funds. So the goal is to get all of the monies mobilized, and since this is round 3, that's going to be something that might need an additional step at the end.
Mm-hmm. So part 2 of the memo is just a brief update for mayor and council on the allocations of the ARPA money, the framework money, to their various offices. We've updated those numbers with the amount that is available as of the end of August. And the third part of the memo talks about the city-managed projects. And as has been mentioned before, when we updated mayor and council earlier this summer, we talked about a balance of a little over $7 million that was not going to be used according to its original programming. It wasn't needed to be used according to its original programming, and could be subject to reallocation. We're returning to you this afternoon with a recommended reallocation, and it's based on a number of existing unmet funding needs, but all of what is recommended in the allocation fits nicely within the established framework categories, promoting affordable and stable housing, community reinvestment and recovery, investment in digital literacy and access, investment in our organization, and youth development. And the full listing of that recommended reallocation is included in the memo. That's the report that I have for you.
Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate the report. And I remember clearly when we passed the American Rescue Plan framework, initially we did so with the intention of centering that investment into the first and worst hit regarding COVID, because we have to remember that ARPA is a response from the federal government on COVID. And the goal was to make sure that we invested in long-term transformative investments in the most vulnerable communities within our city to be able to serve our communities, keep them safe and vibrant, and improve the quality of life of those residents in the areas hardest hit. So I think that your recommendations on reallocating $7.2 million from projects that didn't come to fruition to these projects that have a need is really well thought out. I love that we are funding the Amphi Housing Resource Center, and I think that 1.5 million is covers the full need of Amphi Resource Center.
Honorable Mayor, it does leave a little bit of funding that needs to be identified, but my commitment to you is that we will be able to identify and secure that funding to fully close that gap. But with this funding, it does get the job done.
Excellent. And I see Cushing Street Skate Park extending summer 2025 pool hours and irrigation at Palo Verde Park, and investment for small businesses, the creation of the Office of Violence Prevention and Intervention. So many worthy projects that we need to be able to complete. So I'm feeling very confident about this recommendation. My only question is, what is the impact that the community partner grants have had in our residents that sometimes feels very intangible because it's funding to different nonprofits within the community? Do we have any numbers? Do we have any reports of what type of help ARPA funds have provided the nonprofit partners?
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, we can give a more thorough response on that after we do some assembly of the data. But for now, what I would like to do is emphasize that the vast majority of that funding went to direct services to people most in need in our community. So if I were to give you an example, some of the types of work that were done were to create plumbing repairs for people in low-income households. So it's a triple win. It's something that the leaking water is a water loss. The cost of doing the repairs was unreachable for some folks. And then the ability to also work through community partners means that the jobs that are created through those investments are in people who are passionate about the work and are building capacity. Work is getting done in low-income households that is necessary and makes their households more livable, more affordable, and we're doing water conservation. So that's an example of the type of investment that the community partners have been able to do, but we will follow up with some more details on the full scope of what has been accomplished in phases 1 and 2.
Any other comments or questions from the colleagues? Councilmember Santa Cruz?
So in the past, we were using ARPA monies and distributing it to the different council offices, and so that's gone through, right? We got 3 cycles of that as well. I know we didn't get the other infrastructure funds this year, foreseeing that we'd have these budget constraints. I just, again, want to make sure we're not losing sight of future allocations for the council offices. I've shared before that our allocation is how we did participatory budgeting, and that's had a really great impact in our community around engagement. So we want to make sure that we continue that. As far as round 3, what does the time frame look like, and when do we expect these community groups to have those funds expended by?
Those are great questions. Thank you, Councilmember Santa Cruz. We are notifying on the website, so the entities that apply can be aware that we are expecting that the round 3 funding will be effective starting November 1st of this year through June 30th of 2026. So a little more than a year for spending of this round of funding.
And then are we continuing to use like an equity lens in how we're distributing these grants?
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, yes. In order to even qualify for ARPA funding, and to a large degree, it does have to be directed toward the areas hit first and worst by the pandemic, which tends to be underinvested areas of the community and underrepresented populations. So that is where the ARPA funds are intended, and that is where they're directed.
Any other questions or comments? Alrighty, may I have a motion to pass city manager recommendations?
So moved.
There is a motion. There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any against? Motion carries. Thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you. So we move on to item 5. Time has been reserved for mayor and council to review and provide direction to staff on several water-related items. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mayor, and members of the council. Joining us at the table is Water Director John Kamik. He will be giving you a couple of updates on water resources-related matters, including our CAP order proposed for next year. And he'll be briefly overviewing the updated 5-year water financial plan. And at the end of this item, there are two items we will ask for your direction on.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Manager. Honorable Mayor, members of council. So yes, this update is going to come in 2 parts. So I'm going to break this study session item into focusing first and foremost on our water supply, like we do about every time this year, including an update on the Colorado River, our draft CIP order for 2025, and a status update on the city's drought preparedness plan. And then the second part, like the manager mentioned, will focus on the latest update to the utilities financial plan and ask to move forward on several aspects of that plan. So first, diving into the Colorado River. So the latest conditions on the river, the Bureau has decided on August 15th, just last month, to maintain what's referred to as a level 1 shortage condition for 2025, meaning that lake mean elevations will fall somewhere between 1075 and 1050 feet above sea level by January 1st of this year. And that more or less is due to the near normal flows coupled with all the conservation efforts that have been taking place around the basin, including Tucson's participation over the last several years. So it was, though it was a good winter, it wasn't a great winter. Though it was there was a good spring runoff, it wasn't all the spring runoff. So we basically are holding our own on the Colorado River. So in support of the river, we are in our 3rd year of a 3-year agreement called the System Conservation Plan. We will be leaving in 2025 30,000 acre-feet of the city's allotment back in the Colorado River system, and that's bringing our contribution totals for this latest plan to 110,000 acre-feet. So the city should be greatly commended for being one of the largest participants in helping to protect the Colorado. Moving on to the CAP order for next year. In the materials is the draft CAP order for Tucson Water and also for those partners who participate in our facilities for the calendar year 2025. We are looking for an action at the end of this item to accept the Tucson Water CAP order for 25. Of note and interest, the city will be taking 114,191 acre-feet of CAP water next year. Most of it is stored in our facilities, the facilities we share at Pima Mine Road with CAWCD, as well as the long-standing traditional agreements that the city has with local agriculture by using groundwater savings facilities. Our partners in Maricopa County will be storing 27,000 acre-feet in our facilities next year, Phoenix at 20,000, Scottsdale at 5,000, and Peoria at 2,000 acre-feet. And our local partners that we traditionally store with us will also be sending a combination of water totaling 6,322 acre-feet. This includes Oro Valley at 3,500, Pasquayaki at 1,500, Vail at 1,300, and Marana at 22. Last year, the BOR moved the status from 2023, which was a level 2 shortage condition based on the 2019 operating guidelines, back up to a level 1 shortage condition for calendar year 24. And this was based on the great winter snows that helped raise the levels in 23. Last year, the Water Department and manager recommended that we should continue our Drought Preparedness Plan Tier 2 efforts that were initiated in 23 while we watch and see how the river reacts over the next couple of years. This year, the Bureau, as stated, mentioned a moment ago, the Colorado will stay within the level 1 shortage condition at the beginning of 25, but it is our recommendation at this time that we as a city continue to operate like we have in 2024 under the city's Tier 2 drought preparedness guidelines. This will include the continuation of outreach to customers that are 2.5 times the system average of use, to provide them the knowledge of their use, as well as provide direction to resources to assist with lowering their consumption if they can. Outreach to customers last year included 6,566 single-family residential customers that exceeded the water use guidelines. An additional 70 multifamily and 15 duplex-triplex customers were identified as well. Of those, 186 requested in-person audits, while 521 customers chose to use the online home water use audit tool that resulted in a $25 bill credit to support their efforts in learning more about their consumption and giving guidance on how to address their use. Other notable activities last year that we all participated in included a restructuring of the commercial and industrial rate structure to extend the length of the summer surcharge months from 6 to 9, and giving that stronger signal for conservation, particularly for those commercial and industrial customers that had discretionary outdoor use. Multiple AZ WIFA loans from their conservation funding that is also going to kickstart our advanced metering infrastructure program, providing funding for a turf reduction program, and providing funding for water fixture replacements in city housing as well. So all those actions were accomplished last year and moving forward. So at this time, talking about the Colorado River in our order, I'll pause for any questions or comments related to those.
Do we have a motion? Because do you want one motion to approve the CAP order for calendar year 2025 and then adopt the fiscal year 25-29 financial plan? Or do you want one or two motions?
I think we can do two motions. If you want to do the adopt the CAP order for 2025 right now, that'd be great.
Okay.
So moved, Your Honor.
Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve staff's CAP order for calendar year 2025. Discussion. Councilmember Ulick, I think you had your hand up.
That's fine. I was going to make the motion. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions on this item? Go ahead, Councilmember.
I know I made the motion and it's, I don't want to make this too business as usual. Obviously, for clarification, so everybody understands, we are repurchasing our full allotment.
No, and Council Member, Honorable Mayor, next year will be the last year of the 3-year system conservation plan. So it'll only be 114,000
This
instead
is
of
the last
144.
year. This
Right,
year's
this
the
is the last 144, and then the other piece is we're going to continue to go to our customers that are 2.5 times the max to make sure we're considering all of our conservation and outreach stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I know we've gotten pretty good at this. It's kind of business as usual, but I just want to make sure we're going to continue. We're staying vigilant to protect our sustainable, our sustainable water supply that has become sustainable over the last 30 years that this body has done. That being said, that's why I'm making this motion.
Any other comments or questions? How much related to Councilmember Cunningham's questions, how much is the city of Tucson receiving this year, the last year that we're leaving water in Lake Mead?
Yes, Honorable Mayor, members of council, we're receiving under this plan $400 an acre foot. So that works out to another $12 million stipend that we'll get from the federal government for leaving the water in for 2025.
And the mayor and council have already made decisions in terms of how we're spending those dollars, correct?
Yes, yes, Mayor. We've looked at other projects that you guys have voted on in the recent past to include developing other water resources, like making sure we have the proper funding for the Northwest Wells treatment system.
And then what is the benefit of replacing meters from AMR to AMI? Because I know that we're moving forward with AMI meters. What's the difference?
Okay, Honorable Mayor, thank you for that question. So AMR is a technology where it broadcasts the meter read from the meter itself, and our crews drive around once a month in each of the areas to collect those once-in-time readings to do our monthly bills for the customers. By going to AMI, we're going to a system where that will change it to a cellular system, so then the utility as well as the customer will have the ability to look at more real-time water consumption data. At the utility, we can then spot trends if somebody's using an unusual amount of water and make proactive phone calls to tell somebody that we're seeing a high bill, as well as on the customer side, they're going to be able to set alarms for themselves, so they would get text messages if there's something out of the ordinary that could also indicate to them that their water consumption is outside the norm. So there's a lot of water conservation features that we're looking to put into this advanced program of continuous data monitoring.
All righty, any other questions on this item? Alrighty, so there's a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any against? Motion carries. The second motion we need is the adoption of the fiscal year 25, fiscal year 29, to fiscal year 29 financial plan. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
Second, Your Honor.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any questions or comments on this item? All righty, hearing none. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? Motion carries. Anything else that you'd like to add to
Thank
the
you, Mayor.
item?
That's great.
I do have a question because we always get questions about these. Sweetwater Wetlands annual burn will be happening soon. Do you want to share the dates and how Tucson Water is working to do outreach with Tucsonans to be aware of the burn?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor. Yes, every fall we, in an effort to maintain our vector control or our mosquito control at the Sweetwater Wetlands, we usually do about a 50% burn of each side of the wetland every other year. So this year there will be two smaller burns that will take up 50% of it. I don't have the date. I know the first burn is coming up within the next week or two, but the outreach means outreach that we do not only with the areas in the neighborhoods surrounding the Sweetwater Preserve, I think in a 1 mile area, but we also have to coordinate with Pima County DEQ for air quality, as well as the Arizona Department of Transportation in case smoke gets close to the I-10 area. So there's a lot of coordination that goes on prior to that. In addition, at the site itself, we work with a lot of the wildlife and the environmentalist groups in the area to make sure that they have an opportunity to help move any creatures that is in the proposed burn area into areas that will not be burned. But we can get that, we'll definitely get that date to you and council very soon. I just don't have it at my fingers.
Okay.
Oh, manager might have it.
Honorable Mayor, I'll include that in my manager's report at this evening's study session. We'll get those dates and we'll announce them tonight.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Really appreciate it. All righty, we move on to item 6. Let's see what it is. Item 6, time has been set aside for mayor and council to receive an update and provide direction on proposed amendments to the Unified Development Code related to corridor redevelopment tools, electric vehicle charging, and middle housing. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and members of the council. Here to present on this item are 3-day-in Assistant City Manager Christina Swallow, who is the recovering Director of Planning and Development Services, and our new Interim Director of Planning and Development Services, Corin Manning. I'll turn it over to them to guide you through this item.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Today we have 3 items that we're going to be updating you on. It's a lot to kind of provide an update, but they're linked and related. And I think just as an overall understanding, The corridor redevelopment is really focused on our commercial corridors with an emphasis on housing and producing more affordability broadly across our community. The electric vehicle charging regulations are something Mayor and Council directed and we implemented a couple of years ago. And we've had the opportunity to review and determine how they're working, if there might be opportunities to improve them. And should Mayor and Council decide to direct us to do so, those changes would fit well within our corridor redevelopment package. So we wanted to make sure you had an update on where that was prior to having to providing some direction on EV charging regulations. And the third that we're going to be talking about today is the middle housing regulations that the state directed us to implement by January 1, 2026, and asking for Mayor and Council's direction to start with that. And again, looking at corridors is primarily commercial. Middle housing is really going to be the housing part of our code. So they sort of are parallel and linked, but different. But we wanted to give a full update for you and then get direction on both EV charging and middle housing. So to recap on the corridor redevelopment tools, Mayor and Council, you directed us and provided input over a period of 4 study sessions last year, really recognizing that housing affordability is a serious issue in Tucson and that there may be some opportunity along our commercial corridors to update our zoning code to provide better opportunities for not just redevelopment, but development from the outset, development and redevelopment to increase supply and diversity of housing options. The goals of this effort really are, as I mentioned, it's affordable housing, transit-oriented infill development, providing more diversity of housing types, and redevelopment, simplifying the process and making it easier for that development to happen. One of the core pieces of engagement that we found when we started doing this is that over the last many years, Mayor and Council has provided policy and direction to us, to the various departments across the city, looking at trying to figure out how do we provide this affordability? How do we change the way we build? And what we found is that our zoning code just doesn't align with those goals, the policy or the Mayor and Council vision and how we're growing. And so when we started this effort on the corridor redevelopment tools, we looked at all of that policy direction we've received summarized in some of these documents up here, as well as the community engagement efforts that went along with those documents and some of the feedback we received from the community along the way. So using that as a basis, we also went out and looked to see where we might best be able to accomplish some of those goals. Where are the areas in town that have the best opportunity for development or redevelopment? And we found that those do lie primarily along our commercial corridors. This map we shared with you last fall to show some of those highlighted areas, those sites that were prime for development or redevelopment. While we were working in PDSD on our efforts, Ward 6 and Ward 3 actually asked the Drought Institute to really focus in on tiny homes and how tiny homes might help us address some of these challenges and these concerns and where there may be policy barriers to more tiny home development. And we were part of those conversations, and we continue to look at the Drought Institute to help us as we work on corridors, and you'll hear later as we work on the middle housing effort. The Drought Institute is really been valuable in our research and our development of this. What they found was similar to what we found, and we're looking to use some of their recommendations in the corridor redevelopment tools. So some of their recommendations will very specifically apply to our commercial corridors, and some of their other recommendations will probably be implemented in our middle housing. So we're looking forward to using what they found and their recommendations in a couple of our efforts to really help improve our code to meet the policies and the interest and the vision of the Mayor and Council. No surprise here, when we started looking at the barriers to development and redevelopment along our commercial corridors, we found those challenges are the requirements that we have for parking. We have tools where developers can reduce the amount of parking that they need to install, but that's an extra step, and it increases the risk if they have to go through that step. So, changing those parking requirements from the outset would make it easier for them to redevelop. Height maximums. We actually had a lot of conversation last year with a project that was proposing to go just slightly over the height maximum that is in the existing code. They wanted 45 feet to meet modern building standards versus 40, which would have been allowed with a typical for that 4-story. So height maximums. Density and lot coverage regulations, big challenge. Setbacks, split zoning. Again, we've seen some of those projects work their way through and not necessarily make it through because of the challenges with the split zoning. And then, of course, I mentioned the parking plans, those discretionary processes, whether it's a full zone change or an IPP. Those create challenges. They create risk for the developers, and sometimes it means the developers aren't even interested in starting because they don't know what that outcome is going to be. So those were the barriers we identified. We also identified there are economic barriers, and while we may not be able to address all the economic challenges, if we can make the zoning easier, it will reduce some of those economic barriers because the project will have a faster timeline to implementation. So what we're doing right now is we are working on developing the actual specific code to address those barriers to facilitate that development of housing and mixed-use commercial along our commercial corridors. So in August, we did some initial community feedback just to hear, if they had any concerns over the high-level barriers. We told them parking lot coverage, density, height. We got some general feedback on them, on those proposals. We're writing the specific code. In October, we will go back out to the community with that specific code language, what those heights might look like, what those setbacks might look like, and where we're looking to maybe change the parking requirements. Based on that, we'll go to the Planning Commission for study session later in October, Planning Commission for the public hearing in November, and then we plan to come back to you in December with a public hearing to make the code changes. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Corin to provide an update on the EV regulations and the middle housing bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of council. We have done a one-year review of the EV charging requirements. So Mayor and Council adopted EV readiness requirements for commercial and multifamily development that became effective in December of 2022. And when those new requirements were adopted, Mayor and Council also gave our department direction to evaluate those codes about a year after implementation to see what was working, how were those being implemented. So we really took note throughout the process of implementing this of any challenges that applicants and property owners were facing. And then earlier this year, we did a survey that we put out to the community, and a number of applicants and developers, as well as just members of the public, responded to that survey to share feedback on how these new standards were working. We also looked at a number of project plans to see how they had implemented EV regulations and any challenges they had run into. So we got a lot of feedback from the community, and based on the feedback, we identified a few potential areas that we could make some small adjustments to improve how these regulations are working for our community. So we had a couple recommendations that came from that survey and analysis that we shared with Mayor and Council. There's two in particular that we think align well with the corridor redevelopment goals, where we are looking to right-size our parking regulations overall as a community, and it could be a time to sort of right-size those EV requirements as well. So one of the issues that has come up is how to apply this to expansions of existing sites, kind of legacy businesses and institutions in our community when they want to expand their operations. So what we're proposing is to revise the requirements for site expansion to clarify that these EV requirements only apply to newly developed parking areas. And so that new infrastructure would only be installed in new parking areas. And then the second requirement is to establish a path to reduce the EV requirements when less parking is provided than required by code. So in a lot of instances, we see that a business is able to, or a use is able to justify less parking through proximity to transit and things like that, but there isn't currently an avenue to reduce the EV requirements proportional with the parking reductions. So as we're looking at reevaluating our parking minimums and standards on corridors across the community, that's a chance to look at these EV requirements as well as part of that. So these are the two areas we would recommend further consideration and potential inclusion in that corridor package. Next, I'm going to switch gears to the middle housing requirements and the House Bill 2721, which was adopted by the state legislature earlier this year. We provided a brief update to Mayor and Council on this in June, and at that time, Mayor and Council gave us direction to move forward on several of the bills that were passed by the state legislature, including the ADU bill and several others. This one, we just wanted a little more time to kind of digest and understand the regulations. So we've been looking at this more closely. This is the bill that requires municipalities with a population of more than 75,000 to adopt regulations to allow middle housing within a mile of the central business district on all lots zoned for single-family residential. Middle housing is defined as duplexes, triplexes, and townhouses. Duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhouses. And we have until January 1st, 2026 to put these regulations in place. So we do have about a year to a little over a year to work on this. We've looked at where this would apply in Tucson. So we've mapped our central business district and looked at kind of that 1 mile area, which is the minimum that's required by the state bill to be included in the middle housing area, where middle housing must be allowed by right. So many of the areas around our central business district already allow some middle housing typologies. Our R2 district allows duplexes, it allows small multifamily. But a lot of the zones in this area, kind of the brighter yellow is R1, that is an area that allows only single family and does not currently allow middle housing. So those would be some of the changes that we'd be looking at, is how to allow middle housing in those zones that don't currently allow it today. So some of the issues that we'll need to consider and explore as we look at how to implement this in Tucson are really how this aligns with some of the overlays we already have in place in and around our central business district. We have an infill incentive district that allows multifamily already. We have a lot of other overlays, historic preservation zones, neighborhood preservation zones, so we need to align those. There's regulations around how to calculate density that we need to analyze further, and then we need to look at commercial standards. So usually when we have small multifamily of 3-4 units, there are some standards that apply to those types of developments that don't necessarily apply to single family around landscaping, circulation, parking. So that'll be an area that we're looking at further. And then also building and fire code requirements. There are some restrictions in this bill that limit how fire and commercial building codes can be applied. So we've already started conversations with our fire departments on how to align those regulations. And then we also want to look at how to apply these regulations in Tucson in a way that is based on our local goals for housing affordability, and how we can use these state requirements to better meet some of the goals Mayor and Council have established around housing affordability through our housing affordability strategy, prosperity initiative, and other plans. So we'll be looking at what geography we want to consider for middle housing regulations based on our community's needs and characteristics. So we'll be looking at how we can make sure this code can be applied consistently across the city and promote appropriate infill development. We would like to begin this research and analysis this fall. We're proposing to do that work, again, in partnership with the Drought Institute, building on a lot of the work they've already done that Christina mentioned. Their mini home study, I think, is a good foundation for further exploring middle housing regulations. So we've been discussing with them what that research partnership could look like. We would like to present those findings to Mayor and Council in early 2025, January, February of next year, to basically share what we've found through that analysis and get direction on some options of where we could go with this code amendment. From there, we would, of course, conduct community engagement, really explore these ideas with our community and start to develop a code proposal. We would anticipate coming back to mayor and council later next year, just like we did with the corridor package, to share an update on what we're hearing from the community and where we're going with the proposal. And then the code amendment would go through that public review process later next year, and in order to meet that January 1, 2026 deadline. So that is the timeline we propose for middle housing. And again, what we're looking for today from mayor and council is direction on whether to include the EV requirements in our code redevelopment package, and then initiation of the middle housing code amendment process.
So you need some direction from mayor and council to continue with the processes with the corridor redevelopment, the EV, and then start the middle housing process.
EV and middle housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
One motion would be great.
I'll so move to continue.
City
Second.
manager recommendation, right?
So I'm going to second moving the manager's recommendation. Thank you, Ward 1. I'd like to make some comments on it.
Okay, so there is a motion and a second. Councilmember Cunningham.
So I think this is the best time, as you guys develop your framework, to put it on the record. I know we discussed some of this stuff offline, but I think some of this stuff needs to be said out loud. I'm hoping I'm able to break it down for some folks who aren't in the real estate or architecture game, but also understand it the way an old-time social studies teacher understands it. So one of the things that we talk about in middle housing is height requirements. It's kind of the elephant in the room. Everybody gets really excited about it, and they get very worried. And we can be assured that we're going to have proper setbacks, but the bottom line is that we've got to have some type of uniform formula or algorithm and some designated areas where we can build up instead of building out. Everyone has always said they want to build up, they want to build out. They want to build up, they don't want to build up, but they don't necessarily want to build up 100 feet from their house. And we've got to really figure out a way to thread that needle. I think we've got some great suggestions to do that. So that's the first piece as we develop this framework. I think the second part of this framework that we're going to develop is we're going to talk about parking, and we've got to have some parking contingency plans. We have to have some shared parking ability. We have to have some parking flexibility and some specialized parking for certain places that have big special events, but it's only like 4 times a year. And so here we have this parking code that was developed in the 1960s, where it's like, well, one time a year, you're going to have 350 people here, so you need to have 700 parking spots. And that's kind of what we're working with. We've got to figure out how to be creative there. We also have to, maybe we can put something in code that says, hey, look, on contingency parking, shared agreements, we facilitate them with different people. I don't know how that goes. The city attorney will probably have a heart attack if I say too much about it, but the bottom line is that we have to have that flexibility in parking and that recognition to recognize, like, there's certain areas in town where probably you're only going to have 1 car in that household. And there's other areas in town where you're likely going to have 2 and sometimes even 3. And we've got to be able to delineate from where those are and what that is. One of the things is that I like this building height piece, but I also think there's a building height like opportunity. And that the reason is a lot of people don't know this, but when you build 5 stories, you can build a wooden frame. But when you get to about 6 stories, you have to use a steel frame. And it's not even worth it unless you go up like an extra 3 or 4 stories. So we probably have to keep that we need to keep that practice in mind. In other words, if we say, hey, look, you can go 7 stories, it's like, well, great, because I'm only going to go 5. So we have to really understand that if somebody wants to go up in the air 15, 16 stories and use steel, they have to be able to. And so we have to factor in, it's probably 80 feet or 160 is the next piece, or whatever, 125. I with my vast experience in all the skyscrapers that I built, I'm only speaking the best I can and as educated I can when it comes to these things. I think we can do this through opportunity corners and opportunity corridors. So we'll have some corridors where we're like, hey, we're going to build a skyline up and down here. This is where it's going to be. It's not going to be invasive to neighborhoods, but there's also corners where it's just obvious. It's like, why isn't there something just built there? Let's go. So I think there's some opportunity corners and some corridors, and that process will have to be to become a building opportunity corridor. that process will have to be pretty involved, because all I can see is certain developers going, oh, I'm going to make mine an opportunity corridor and get 200 feet in the air. It's like, well, you know, man, there's like 800 people who bought their houses 20 years ago who don't, you know, have this expectation of privacy. So we may not be able to do that, but I think there's some opportunity there. On the middle housing with the townhomes, we talked about this. There's still this weird law that's restrictive in holding the builder liable for problems in the entire complex if there's one unit that's defective. And that's the bigger barrier here with middle housing. I know it's a condo and townhome law. I know the legislature has a couple proposals to address it. It's a bipartisan effort. I think it's low-hanging fruit. It's something that I'd love to see Andres work on in this next session. And I think it's something that we can get passed in the legislature to help us, because that along with what we're doing in this framework will give us some middle housing. And hey, look, I know that for some of us, we want to have less people. We want to take some congestion out of traffic. We want to give people alternative ways to get around. But at the same time, there's got to be places where we can, meet in the middle ground and have areas where we can accommodate both parking and accommodate an adequate amount of living space especially for startup families, people in the first time moving out, just folks like that. And that's what middle housing is all about. It's perfect in different areas in Tucson that aren't necessarily suburban, but they're not urban yet. They're kind of in the middle. That's why it's middle housing. Okay, so C2 and C2-3, C2B. So we talked about this one. This is a pretty interesting one. I think this is not a jumping off point, but I want it brought up in some of these groups. The bottom line is that with our ADU program and with what the legislature has kind of thrown on us with the housing near the district, they're almost saying, well, from now on, every C1 is a C2. They're not saying it exactly, but it's pretty darn close. So what we need to do is say, all right, yeah, we're going to have C2 and C1, and C2, we can have C2 everywhere, which is fine, but one of them is going to have a height requirement and one of them isn't. And I think that's really the discussion we're part of. And then depending on which zone you're in, one is going to have a more stringent parking requirement than the other. And I think that's how this is going to kind of fit together. It's like a puzzle piece almost. And by the way, I do not envy what you have in front of you over the next year, Corin, but I know you're up to the task. Big shout out to the Drachman Institute. It's pretty special that we have a College of Architecture here, and we've got some people in that institute that are just absolutely top-notch and incredible. They're some of the best in the world, so I'm glad that we're able to bring them on as partners to work with us. And finally, we have all these things with this EV change. I know that people are going to try to pick at it and throw rocks at it, but there's some stuff that isn't making sense 100%. We needed this EV piece for a number of different things to sync us up with some of the overarching plans we have to address climate change in the city. And so these EV tweaks are just like common sense. We'll probably be able to revert back to where we are now eventually. But let's ease into this. And a lot of people need to understand it's not going to be an overnight process that's going to transform the city. It's going to be a 20 or 30-year transformation. But I think if we do it right and we lay this framework right now, I think if we do it, it's going to be a beautiful transformation. It's going to be something that all of us are going to, when we're in our later years and advanced years and our kids are enjoying the city we've helped mold, we'll be able to reminisce, or I might not be because I'll probably lost my memory by then. But the bottom line is that this is a really important piece to basically saying, all right, this city is going to be a big city, and we have to kind of accept that. We're at that crossroads. There's 1 million people in the county now, and we've got to accept that and grow smartly and not just outwardly. So that's the end of my comments. I hope those framework is helpful, and that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Ulick, and then Councilmember Santa Cruz.
Thank you. So I just want to provide or ask for clarification and make sure the public understands the action we're taking is to integrate the EV recommendations into the corridor work and have that proceed in the public process. Is that correct? So, and would that include the Planning Commission?
Yes. And,
Okay.
and the motion includes the initiation for the middle housing code development.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to make sure that's the case. And I also wanted to thank the staff, both for partnering with the Drockman Institute. I know that the Ward 6 office and really with support from Ann Charles and her foundation, as well as Ward 6, initiating that initial study on mini homes. I hope everybody does take the time to read that study, because I think it really does offer great information on what other cities have pursued in order to open up opportunities for a broader range of housing. So thanks to the Drockman Institute and also to staff for really engaging with the public. I know I'm going to be speaking with the Loft. I see the Loft is called out in the materials, and I appreciate that. It's a really good example of an establishment that's so important in our community. Very, I think very much on board with our goals in the EV program, and they're expanding. And I think if we don't get those adjustments correct in the EV requirements, it may pose some insurmountable challenges for progress. So I think I think this makes a lot of sense in terms of the approach, and I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you so much.
Councilmember Santa Cruz.
Yes, thank you. Really excited about the progress we've made in revisiting a lot of what's created our housing crisis here in the city of Tucson. As a community, as a society, we know that the only constant is change, and to not have our policies and our ordinances, be flexible and adapting to the times has really limited us. And I know a lot of change is coming really fast, but we have a lot of needs in our community. So I know that I've been talking to some of the planning commissioners, also really looking at parking and parking minimums. And so I know that conversations that I've had with Councilmember Ulick and our interest also in relooking at that, and even some of the challenges we've known with the ADUs. So I will be bringing that back up as y'all are doing this work. So thank you. I think the other piece that stood out for me from the Drockman Institute report was the declaring a housing crisis emergency. And so I'm curious if that's something that we can also work on as we roll out this entire, this package of how we're going to address our housing crisis.
Yeah, that was a wonderful point in the Drockman Institute recommendations, like immediate recommendations. And we have declared a climate emergency. As a matter of fact, we're coming up to the 4th year. We're celebrating the 4th year of passing as a mayor and council a climate emergency. We also passed a opioid and fentanyl use in our community as a public health emergency, and being able to pass a affordable housing or housing emergency in our city would make a whole lot of sense, because it would establish the goals. In other words, we would memorialize the goals that we have in our housing affordability strategy into action items for a resolution. So, we've got to put some time and effort and make sure that we work with both staff and the community just to make sure that we have the appropriate goals in that housing emergency, but I don't see why not.
And I know you've led the way, Mayor, on those previous two, so curious if that's something that you can help, lead us on, and maybe even get the county to do the same so that we're all working together on that.
And we really do have stated goals in the housing affordability strategy for Tucson. It would just be elevating it to a crisis, right? To an emergency, which it really is. And being able to frame it in that manner, council member, would really help us with working with the neighborhoods throughout our city regarding that corridor redevelopment. Because I think that many people feel as though they agree, right? We do have a housing crisis. We need more units. We need more affordable units. We need more housing opportunities. But it's difficult to accept that those units have to happen in proximity to you. And so that work that we have to do with the community about where it is acceptable to add more units is good. And I mean, that's why we wanted to use the corridor redevelopment, because the corridor redevelopment are in areas of high traffic, high transit lines, and many of these corridors have unused parking lots that, should be put to better use.
Yes, and I agree. I think it'll help anchor, the work that we have ahead of us. So thank you.
Any other of my colleagues have any questions, comments? Well, I appreciate you all coming back with potential tools for corridor redevelopment. We've been talking about this, as you noted in your presentation, for some time now, and it really is good to feel as though we're moving forward with what we on this table have all seen the needs are. So thank you so much. I would like to add my appreciation to the Druckmann Institute for putting their heads together, and of course Ward 6 and Charles for working to fund this project, to give us some ideas of what other cities are doing and what we can work on as a city ourselves. So I'm happy. In terms of the EV revisions, I appreciate that it's a living document, right? When we pass codes and we pass regulations and when we pass especially new and innovative requirements, we want to be able to be as flexible as possible while still delivering the goals of what the community wants to see. And so it makes sense to be able to move around and be able to be flexible on the EV requirements. It should never be, it's either affordable housing or EV. We need to learn how to work through it and make sure that we are delivering the goals outlined by our different processes in our community to be able to deliver more charging stations, right? The ability for more individuals within our community to own an EV. And yet at the same time, we have to be pragmatic. There's that example of the Loft that they already had like 6 EV charging stations. And they were not adding any additional parking. But so we learn and we change and we move, of course, with the goals of providing those goals that the community wants us to use. So I guess for me, my question would be, what are some of the potential challenges in this middle housing bill that was passed by the state legislature in implementing those housing regulations?
Mayor, members of council, I think some of the challenges will be really how do we apply this in Tucson based on the zones that we already have and the neighborhoods in the area where we need to focus per the state legislation, which is that 1 mile radius from downtown. There's a wide diversity of neighborhoods in that area. So we're really going to look at how much flexibility do we have per the state law. I think there is some ability to to apply the regulations differently in different zones as long as we're meeting the minimum state regulations. So that's what we'll be looking at, is how much flexibility do we have to tailor to different types of neighborhoods and different zones. And then I think, like I mentioned, we want to broaden the conversation to really look at how can these regulations around middle housing, how can they help us in some of the goals we've identified as a community already around housing affordability, around tiny homes, and the need for more infill housing. So I think we do want to have that conversation of what are some other areas that make sense for middle housing. It could be some of our zones that we already have that do allow middle housing, not to the extent that this bill provides for, but already does allow some middle housing. So are there places where we can make it easier to build middle housing in some of those zones we already have? There's areas that are close to transit, that are close to some of our other major activity centers that could make sense to allow middle housing as well. So I think really we'll want to have that full conversation with the community.
One of the issues that I had with the middle housing bill, and I had a lot of questions about it, I know that a lot of people had questions about, are the historic preservation zones. How are we going to deal with those, the historicity, right, of those areas when building either ADUs, the additional ADUs permitted by the state legislature, and then the other middle housing requirements?
Mayor, members of council, so the bill does apply in historic zones, so that's one of the things we're looking at, is how to align this. So it's interesting because a lot of our historic neighborhoods, actually, most of the construction was in an earlier time period when there were not parking requirements on the site, and we actually see a lot of middle housing typologies that are very typical in Tucson in historic neighborhoods, duplexes, even small apartment buildings, bungalow courts. So I think this can actually align well with the goals of historic districts. And one thing, this is true of the middle housing and the ADU bill. While those housing types are allowed in the historic zones, it does not exempt them from historic review. So any new development in a historic zone for ADUs or the middle housing would still go through the historic design review process and would need to meet our historic design requirements.
That is wonderful. That's a wonderful clarity for it. Anything else? There's a motion and a second. If there's no other comments, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any against? Motion carries. Thank you so much. Really appreciate. Alrighty, so we move on to item 7. Let me see. Item 7, time has been set aside for mayor and council to receive an update on state and national legislation and regional committees. While Andres takes a seat with us, I just wanted to make an announcement. I'm thrilled to announce that the city of Tucson has competed successfully for a $500,000 Choice Neighborhoods Planning Grant from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. We are one out of just 13 cities nationwide that were awarded these funds. This work will serve to kick off further planning to expand our Thrive Zone, work with the 29th Street area. This is wonderful because all of us here on this table selected to expand our Thrive Zones. And of course, we have many different areas of need in our community, but the 29th Street area is a very particular space in our city that really needs investment and TLC. And this particular $500,000 Choice Neighborhood Planning Grant makes me so happy because that's how we started with our Thrive in the 05 planning, right? We received a $500,000 planning grant for the Thrive in the 05, and the result of getting a $50 million Choice Neighborhood grant from the federal government is something that we're living with right now. But these planning grants are very, very important to us. So, as I said, I and I think many of you have heard this story before. Councilmember Ulick is one of the individuals that kicked off the, remember, Karen, it was the Oracle project. We would call it TOP. And that work on Miracle Mile and Oracle and the O5, I started as a council aide for Councilmember Ulick when we started working on that project. And so after so many years, we see the return on investment of time and working and engaging the community to improve our cities. So very happy to hear that the 29th Street corridor will receive this competitive grant, $500,000 to continue working with housing community development staff, community safety, health and wellness staff, Tucson Police Department, and community and nonprofit partners, as well as small businesses and residents in the area that deeply believe in investing time and money to improve the quality of life for our community. So my sincere sincere thanks to Senators Kelly, Senator Sinema, Congressman Grijalva, who have been instrumental in supporting and securing these planning grants as the city of Tucson competes for it. So thank you, Andres and City Manager, for allowing me to brag about the city of Tucson continuing to receive federal funds. I'd like to turn it over to our Director of Federal and State Relations, Andres Cano, to report your news to the Mayor and Council.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor and Council members. Good afternoon. I'm here to provide an update on recent federal and state developments. Yesterday, Mayor Romero joined Acting Deputy Secretary of the Interior, Laura Daniel Davis, at Saguaro National Park for an important announcement regarding wildfire mitigation funding. As part of the Investing in America agenda by the Biden administration, $236 million will be allocated to support wildland fire management in the coming fiscal year. Arizona is set to receive upwards of $10 million in this allocation, and rest assured that I'll be working with our state partners on your behalf to see how Tucson can be supported with this latest funding. On the federal level, Congress has returned from its August recess, and attention has shifted to the budget for fiscal year 2025. With only 3 weeks left in the fiscal year, a continuing resolution is expected to be proposed to keep the government funded past September 30th. You will particularly be interested in the National Defense Authorization Act and the Water Resources Development Act. Those pieces of legislation include important provisions for Tucson, particularly the Water Resources Development Act, which could authorize funding for Tucson's Water's Southlands Recycled Water Loop project. In state updates, the League of Cities and Towns Conference was held in August, where I attended with our city manager, and where several resolutions were passed by the executive committee to shape the upcoming legislative session. A summary of the resolutions that were adopted by the mayors and executive committee members was sent to you last week. The ones that I wanted to flag with you are those efforts to address state shared revenue, advocating for local control on affordable housing policies, and allowing cities to create tax increment financing. There are 7 resolutions. We'll be asking the League for more information so that we can send that to your offices. Wanted to briefly follow up on the discussion about the legislative cycle and the one that we will be having very soon. January is going to come nearby. At the League conference, Governor Hobbs did speak to some issues that perhaps may preview for Mayor and Council what she's thinking about as it relates to housing. She mentioned specifically in her remarks legislation that she would be advocating to address short-term rentals and their impact on cities. She also mentioned the low-income housing tax credit, and she has also been a strong supporter of the Housing Trust Fund. And so I think a combination of those issues, on top of a governor who's been a strong partner on housing for the city of Tucson, we are all eyes open and ears open as well to figure out what that strategy will be. We expect the governor's budget to be introduced shortly after the legislature convenes in January. So I'll continue to monitor these issues closely, Honorable Mayor and council members, and provide updates as we move into the fall season and draft the legislative agenda as well. And with that, I'm available for any questions.
Andres, my question is, I know that Assistant City Manager Swallow and the Planning and Development Services Department have been looking at this ADU and middle housing legislation. And is there an opportunity to bring back any suggested changes to smooth over those requirements that were set forth by the state ledge?
Sure. Thank you, Honorable Mayor and council members. I'm optimistic that the City of Tucson, because of your work on the housing affordability strategy and also our engagement with the League, that we'll be in a prime position to be able to ask for any cleanup bills in the coming legislative session if necessary. I'm encouraged by the implementation being 2026 for the middle housing legislation that you were discussing earlier. But more than anything, I believe that we are in a prime seat to be able to work with our legislative delegation in the event that we need to see any modifications. And that, of course, on top with securing any additional state funding opportunities is going to be crucial as well. And so I will be working closely with the new Assistant City Manager, congratulations, and our planning and zoning team on some of that. We, for instance, already did work earlier in the year to figure out a piece of legislation on zoning requirements that kind of threw lots of cities by surprise, and indeed we're going to comply with state law. It's what we have to do. We have to ensure that the impact is easy for our municipalities as well. Honorable Mayor and Councilmember Cunningham, I did already send a note on the last piece of legislation to our planning team so that we can get working on that as well.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Well, and I think that it's important, since Tucson is such a leader in affordable housing and creating innovative solutions for housing affordability, is there a possibility of the city of Tucson basically leading the conversation on what's next, right? What is it that we as a city need support in from the state legislature, not the other way around? We're on the ground. We're the ones that are working on all of these innovative approaches to affordable housing. How can we help lead the conversation in what we need? Because we're on the ground, we understand what our neighborhoods need and our wants. So it would be wonderful to be able to say, hey, legislature, we have all these ideas that you should consider helping us with. That way, we at least start the conversation as to where they can help us versus the state legislators going to San Diego, getting ideas from San Diego that have nothing to do with Arizona and our laws and how we do things here, and telling us this is how you should do it. So it would be wonderful to be able to start a productive conversation in terms of affordable housing. And then I know that we usually have an annual gathering with our delegation after November. Do we have a date set for that?
Thank you, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. We do have a date, and I did not bring my phone to the dais, but a save the date will be going out to the legislative delegation, and we are working on that as well. And I would just briefly say that I absolutely agree with your assertion that we should be looking for the state to come down to Baja, Arizona to see the good work that this mayor and council has been working on.
Thank you so much. I would love to be able to get some help with that letter, but we can work on it online. Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments, concerns from the colleagues about this item? Hearing none. Well, thank you so much, Andres. Really appreciate the update. So we move on to item 8. Does anyone have any items to remove from the consent agenda or additions to anything on the consent? Mr. Manager?
Honorable Mayor, it's not an addition or a deletion from consent, but it does have to do with tonight's agenda. I did promise I would be able to report the dates of the Sweetwater controlled burns, but I figured I'd do that here. So the two dates are September 17th, which, as Director Kamik indicated, is coming up pretty soon, and November 13th. What I'll caution is weather conditions on a given day could impact those dates, but it's currently September 17th and November 13th. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Tamir. And then item 9, does anyone have items for future agendas? Alrighty, hearing none, study session is adjourned. The regular session will begin, let me look at the time, at 5:30 p.m. The next study session will be Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. Thank you all so much for your work, really appreciate it.